Iran, 4th century BC, the wondrous cities of the Persian Empire. When Aeschylus, the father of modern drama and a Greek, wrote his play The Persians, he portrayed the Persians as an arrogant but humbled people, strong and aggressive but thwarted, bent and defeated in memorable battles, Marathon, Plataea, Salamis. But were the Persians only such coarse adventurers, or does the history written by their enemies hide something of the truth? In the last century, from nearly 250,000 archaeological sites in Persia, the modern-day Iran, relics and monuments are being unearthed that seem to contradict the Greeks' version of history. Inscriptions on rocks and walls of ancient Persian cities, for ages undecipherable, have slowly begun to unravel the mystery. Come with us now on this journey into the past as we open the doors to secrets of the boundless Persian Empire 2,500 years ago, when Persia was the center of the world. Figures in profile, lines of people wearing very different costumes, exotic animals, gifts coming from the most remote corners of the world, ivory tusks, pottery, textiles, and lion skins. When archaeologists digging at Persepolis first beheld these bas-reliefs, they were puzzled. Why depict so many different peoples from such distant lands in one work? But slowly, clues fell into place that gave scholars the answers. The people with the ivory tusk and the okapi are Ethiopians. The dromedary is typical of the Arabs. That pointed headdress clearly belongs to the Shiites. The Assyrians are portrayed with a cart, and here are Indians with a donkey. 23 nations in all carved into this stairway, representing the first great empire in history, the Persian Empire, and the many peoples who converged on its capital. The vast Persian domain stretched from the African continent to the Indus River. It included the fertile lands of Egypt and the Sudan. It expanded into Europe with the reigns of the Shiites and the Thracians. It occupied Arabia and the Babylonian lands between the Tigris and the Euphrates. To the northeast, it extended as far as today's Uzbekistan, and to the southeast, it crossed into India, and at the center, Persia in all its splendor. For decades, these inscriptions represented an intriguing puzzle for archaeologists. In addition to being cuneiform, the text was written in 3 different languages. High up on the mountain of Behistun, perched atop a tall ladder, English Army officer Sir Henry Rawlinson valiantly transcribed the text. That was the easy part. It then took him 10 long years to decipher it. Thanks to the work of this great archaeologist, the puzzle was resolved in 1835, and a whole new world opened up to scholars. The history of the Persians, told this time through their own works. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote, "The Persians adopt foreign customs more readily than any other people." This sentence, written with perhaps a touch of contempt, actually reveals something positive and impressive about the Persians. We are in Pasargadae. The winged genie we see here appears to be a typical Assyrian figure. He is dressed as an Elamite and wears a showy Egyptian headdress. But the genie was not found in either of these lands, but here in Persia. Along with other clues, this suggests that the concept of a unified world, and perhaps the desire to belong to one, originated in Persia, and that the Persians found pleasure in trying out the different lifestyles of the empire's many peoples. Pasargadae, founded in 553 BC, was the empire's first capital. Though later abandoned by the kings in favor of Susa and Persepolis, it was never left to decline. Inscriptions like this one have survived since that time. I am Cyrus, an Achaemenid. Though it is also trilingual, written in Babylonian, Elamite, and Persian, the words call to light one of the greatest world leaders of all time. This is the tomb of Cyrus the Great, the man who built a boundless empire from nothing in just a few years. In Cyrus' time, the economy in Asia was expanding, and the people wanted stability. They wanted an end to the discord among the different tribes and peoples. There was a widespread desire to belong to a unified world. Today, we call this idea ecumenism. At that time, the concept was that of a universal empire. The first one to appreciate its value and to put it into practice was Cyrus himself. In Persia, if you wanted to offer a tribute to the gods, you'd be hard-pressed, for there are no temples here. All over Persia, just as here around Pasargadae, altars have been found standing alone on open hilltops. The traces left by fire during sacrifices can still be distinguished. Along with other evidence, these discoveries helped archaeologists understand the nature of the Persian religion. For the Persians, all of creation was divine, the sky and the earth and all its elements. Hence, sacrifices were not held in an enclosed temple, but out under the open sky. They offered their sacrifices to the sun, to the moon, to the earth, to fire, all as elements of a single deity, Ahura Mazda, who incarnated the supreme good, an early form of monotheism. The Persians, however, did not force the peoples of their empire to believe in Ahura Mazda. They allowed freedom of worship. You could dedicate your sacrifice on the altars to any god you wished. This is Susa, one of the most important archaeological sites in Iran. Relics have been found here dating back to 4000 BC. Years of excavation work have revealed only a fraction of the city, yet the great number of foundations and the remains of massive columns and capitals confirm that Susa was a palatial city equal in grandeur to Persepolis. Historical records tell us that under King Darius I in 512 BC, Susa grew in splendor, becoming a capital together with Persepolis. But why have two capitals? At 5,000 feet above sea level, Persepolis was covered by snow for most of the winter, and thus impractical for many of the governmental functions. With such a large empire to direct, the government certainly couldn't just shut down when the weather got bad. Instead, they transferred operations to Susa, a bona fide imperial capital in its own right. In Susa, archaeologists found glazed tiles that they quickly recognized as pieces of a larger picture. When they were arranged, like a sort of puzzle, they began to tell a story. They fit together to make elaborate tunics, golden jewelry, a javelin, a bow, and a quiver. But who were these warriors so richly adorned? Excavation work began in Susa in 1884. The first to realize that those warriors must have belonged to an elite unit were the French husband and wife team, the Dieulafoy. Examining the puzzle in the light of descriptions by Herodotus, they figured out that what was taking shape before their eyes was the image of one of the emperor's personal guard units, the legendary Immortals. There were 10,000 guards to protect the emperor. When one of them was struck down in battle, another immediately took his place, giving the impression that their ranks were immutable. Hence the name, the Immortals. The king they defended represented the unified state, the power capable of imposing order. And in some parts of the empire, he was seen as a divinity. The inscription at the base of this statue, sculpted in Egypt but found in Susa, bears witness to this. To you, Darius, are given power and stability. All the plains and mountains are collected under your sandals. To you are given Upper and Lower Egypt, who worship your wondrous visage, like that of Ra, for all time. The magnificent archaeological site of Persepolis, one of the most important in the world, lay hidden for 2,000 years. Alexander the Great's troops, in a drunken orgy to celebrate the conquest of the Persian capital, razed it to the ground. Then time and sand buried it for centuries. One of the excavated areas is the place where the court palaces stood. But around them is an entire city of servants' houses, artisans' workshops, and everything else that served life in the king's court, still waiting to be discovered and to reveal more secrets. This 9-pound golden tablet, a treasure in its own right, is a charter and gave scholars insight into the various construction phases of the palace city of Persepolis. By examining the remains of the buildings in the light of the translation of this and other inscriptions, archaeologists were able to attribute each newly excavated area to a particular emperor. What we see here is the original nucleus, founded by Darius. This area represents a transition from Darius to Xerxes, his son, who was defeated by the Greeks. And this area corresponds entirely to Xerxes. The largest part of the archaeological site, a sort of second city, was built by the succeeding emperors down to Darius III. The discovery overturns a conviction passed on to us by the Greeks, especially through Aeschylus and his Persians play, which relates, "The inhabitants of the Asian lands no longer obey the Persians. They no longer bear the exacted tribute, nor do they fall prostrate to let themselves be commanded. The king's greatness is finished." Nothing could be farther from the truth. As we have seen, after Xerxes, the king Aeschylus refers to, Persepolis expanded considerably under his successors, and its splendor grew. Indeed, this did not mark the fall of the empire, nor even its decline. Archaeologists have deciphered friezes and bas-reliefs portraying a moment of great celebration and expansion of the empire. This alone gives us a sense of just how strong and solid that empire was. Quite the opposite of the barbarian images that the ancient Greeks handed down to us. Archaeologists sifting through this ancient record have found images that portray delegations of different peoples. People with proud faces and erect bearing being led by a Persian master of ceremonies to an audience with the King of Kings. Their precious and symbolic gifts tell a much different tale from that of the other great emperors of history, who generally preferred to depict their subjects bound in chains. But the biggest revelation of all came from this bas-relief, found next to the processions of the peoples. The image is clearly symbolic, but what could it mean? Comparing the astral symbols with the Persian calendar, scholars have ascertained that what we see here is the constellation Leo displacing Taurus. We are thus at the first day of spring, a celebration known as Nurus. On this day, the people streamed in from neighboring areas and put up their tents around the center of the world, initiating the empire's greatest festival. Activities would take place both outside and inside the palace grounds. Those invited inside were in for a treat. The royal palace of Persepolis had two grand public halls for receptions. The first one is the Apodana. The second is the Hall of the 100 Columns. Between them is the Tripylon, a private room for the king and his counselors, and behind it lie the royal apartments. Only the delegations representing the imperial domains and the components of the imperial court were allowed to enter the rooms of the court. After ascending the great staircase to the level of the royal chambers, 13 feet higher than the rest of the courtyard, the delegates crowded into the Apodana through this grand portico. The doors and door jambs of the palace were carved in stone, which was very abundant around Persepolis, perched as it was on a terrace of living rock. The walls, on the other hand, were covered in terracotta. The Apodana, also known as the audience chamber, held as many as 10,000 people. To avoid confusing babble, a common language was adopted during ceremonies and official acts, Aramaic, an easy idiom of Semitic origin that used the Phoenician alphabet. By using a language that they themselves had to study and learn, the Persians once again proved to be in the vanguard in desiring a common world that all would want to belong to. Aramaic was the official language of the Persian bureaucracy, an important step for developing from an empire encompassing many peoples to a state composed of a single people. After presiding over the grand procession, the king withdrew to this council chamber, the Tripylon. On the door to the Tripylon, the king is sculpted as being borne aloft by his people, an image that might allude to what happened inside. Here, the king is meeting with his trusted aides to improve the organization of his empire and to make revolutionary decisions. It would be in this chamber where the council resolved to build new roads, chart new sea routes, establish a unified system of weights and measures, and adopt a common currency using bimetal coins made of gold and silver. The north and south doors to the Tripylon, leading to the king's private apartments, are decorated with bas-reliefs showing the king entering and leaving, followed by his servants. The king and his court would have entered his private apartment up these steps. Inside the palace of Darius, you'd better be on your best behavior, or you might have to answer to the king's watchdog. What dinner time was like is suggested by these bas-reliefs. The dishes found here are made of precious metals, offering further testimony to the luxury that distinguished life in the king's court. The king, lord of the provinces and armies, appointed members of his family or his most trusted men to select positions and rewarded them with fabulous gifts. An example is this superb golden sword kept in the Tehran Museum. After the meal, the king and his entourage would move toward the Hall of the 100 Columns. This is where the delegations would present their gifts. The representatives of the peoples of the empire would wait in the courtyard, and from here, when it pleased the king, they would be invited into the Hall of the 100 Columns for the audience. This room was bigger than the first one, but located at a lower level. There was a grand portico before this hall as well. It was richly decorated, hinting at the sumptuousness and sacredness of the chamber within. Not everyone was allowed to approach the king. Sometimes you'd have to be content with just a glimpse of the emperor. When he sat on his throne in the Hall of the 100 Columns, awaiting gifts to be laid at his feet, he was enclosed in curtains and shrouded in shadow. The sparkling of his scepter was the signal that granted the right to speak. Only a very few, as we see in this bas-relief, were allowed to approach him and pay homage with a deferential kiss. The hall is so named because it really contained 100 columns in rows of 10, a forest of stone trunks towering almost 65 feet. So those who were not lucky enough to catch sight of the king could at least enjoy the magic of this enormous hall, which evoked the vastness of the Persian Empire. Mythological animals on the tops of the columns watched over the king, protecting his city and his people. A few miles from Persepolis, archaeologists discovered this building with a square foundation almost 40 feet high. What it was is still a mystery, sparking vigorous debate among scholars, not just because of its unknown origin, but also for its location close to the walls of Mount Nakshi-Rustam. Here there are decorations carved into the rock, strange crosses, human figures, inscriptions, and 4 openings as if rooms had been dug into the mountain, with their entrances off the ground. There are several hypotheses regarding this work. Some say it is a temple of fire, others that it is a watchtower. But the most alluring idea of all is that it once was a library where sacred texts were kept. If you get close enough to the wall, you can see figures that, more than any others, helped scholars understand what is being said here. They are Persians who are mourning the death of their emperor. The crosses of Nakshi-Rustam are the royal tombs of Darius I and his immediate successors. Darius, the great conqueror, who expanded the Persian Empire from India to Egypt, was the first Persian king to have carved into the mountains images and phrases that were true political messages, his spiritual testament. It is here, on a mountain, not in a book, that the true history of Persia is written. That which was ill done, I made good. The provinces were in upheaval. One man was fighting against the other. I brought peace. My law keeps the stronger from harming the weaker. I repaired the city walls that had fallen from age, and I built another wall to serve from now into the future. May Ahura Mazda protect me and my royal house, and what has been inscribed by me.